Hello, everybody. Welcome to Kitabi Club. Today is a special day in the history of India, and I would say more special day in the history of Bangladeshi Liberation War. Here we are with the very first live on YouTube for Kitabi Club with Manash Gosh sir discussing and talking about his experiences and the report from ground zero when he was writing this book particularly. As you can see, the book very well mentions report from ground zero. So, what we should expect as a reader when we say that report from ground zero?
It's very simple, straight. It is a reporter's diary. Whatever was happening in those days,
Hmm.
when the Operation Searchlight was carried out on 25th March 1971 by the Pak Army in Dhaka and elsewhere in East Pakistan. And
Hmm.
after that, on 20, there was nothing appeared in the newspapers about, because Pakistan government had imposed a very strict censorship which did not allow any information to get out of East Pakistan. All the foreign correspondents who were there in Dhaka were bundled out to Karachi in a special aircraft, and as a result, no international media was there to cover what was happening, what the Pakistani military was doing on that day. So very little was coming across to India also, to Calcutta, which is just across the border. And I was then just a cub reporter in the Statesman. I was the youngest cub reporter in the Statesman. I had just come from Delhi, where I was born, brought up, and educated. And I joined the Statesman in Delhi edition of the Statesman. And I had just come to Calcutta, and I thought, what was happening in East Pakistan was it should be, highlighted because
True.
and what happened was there was a very senior CPI MP called Mr. Bhupesh Gupta, a Rajya Sabha MP, whom I met. He was actually Mrs. Gandhi's eyes and ears during the Bangladesh war. And I happened to meet him at a lunch on 27th March, that is 2 days after the crackdown. And he asked me because whereabouts of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman were not known till then. So the first thing he asked me, "Do you know? Since you are a reporter from the Statesman, such a well-reputed paper, you must be knowing what has happened to Mujib's fate." I said, "Sir, I don't know. I am a mere cub reporter. I only cover the police beat and the corporation beat. That's my world of reporting. I don't know all these, international happenings or whatever happening in the neighborhood of India. These are all political things for which there are very senior people who are on these beats, and they must be knowing." He said, "Aren't you ashamed that you work for a paper like Statesman and you don't know where Mujib is?" I said, "Sir, I told you." But he hurt my journalistic ego very much, so much that that night I could not sleep, and not my conscience, that journalistic pride also. So next morning when I woke up, I found a small news item in the paper saying that it was a Bangkok Dateline story which said that foreigners who had returned to Bangkok from Dhaka, the first lot, they had reported seeing, they had seen, truckloads of bodies being carried out of Dhaka for burial. So that gave me an idea that probably I should go to the border, and if anybody comes across to the Indian side, I may get information, news about what's happening across. So I rang up my chief reporter. He said, "Nothing doing. You are a absolute kid. You are a cub reporter. Be content with that status of yours. No need of your going to the border. These are international events." But I that did not. I was unrelenting. Next day happened to be my off day. I went to the border with a senior colleague of mine, with just rupees 50 in my pocket, and he carried 100 rupees in his pocket,
100 rupees, yes.
and went to the border, and waited there the whole day. But no one came from. It was absolutely deserted. No one came from that side, or no one came from this side, went from this side to Pakistan, East Pakistan. But and the BSF commandant who was there, he kept saying that nobody's going to come here because things are still very abnormal in East Pakistan. So you're not going to meet anybody. You better go home, go back to Calcutta. But my reporter's instinct told me that I should hang on, which I did. And it was only at about 5:30 in the evening, during the twilight zone, I found some movement on the other side of the border, on the Pakistani side. I saw a man carrying two handbags, two briefcases coming towards the border. He was whisked into the Pakistani customs for clearance and for security check and whatever. And then he came across, and when he came across, the BSF took him to the commandant's room, for debriefing. And he told, yeah, I came to know later that he was an Italian, one Mr. Falachetti, who had been to Dhaka to collect dues for his company. It was an Italian company which had supplied, all kinds of plumbing materials and sanitary ware
Yes.
for Hotel Intercontinental, and he had gone there to collect dues, but he got caught up with this in this searchlight operation. So
Yes.
he was staying in the Intercontinental Hotel, and he saw the Pakistan Army, what kind of crackdown it was. He saw with his own eyes the military blasting a newspaper office just across the Intercontinental Hotel, and gave me, on way back to Calcutta, he because he told me that he wanted to go to Calcutta, from where he would catch a flight. So I brought him to Calcutta. On the way, he gave me a narration of what he had seen, and next day, the statesman carried a report, which was quite
You were
revealing.
appreciated a lot for it. Yes, it was recognized all
and
over the
and
world, rather. Yeah.
and no, and Mr. Nanpuria, Angel Nanpuria, who was our editor, he called me and said that from now on you will be going to the border every day. There will be a car at your residence at 6 in the morning. You take the car to any part of the border you want to go and report. But don't get too adventurous. Don't, because if anything happens to you, the management won't be responsible for that. So that's how my journey, the Bangladesh was started.
That's exactly what your book describes in the initial pages. But sir, when you said that statement, said you clearly that if anything happens to you, they are not responsible. And when I see the cover also, there is certain amount of blood here. Okay, which is I know the reality of war, but at the same time, what was your family's reaction? Were they very okay with you going because you were a cub reporter? They never said you that, wait, you can experience war zone or whatever it is, that risk in life as a journalist, but then you are important to us. How did you handle that, sir?
My parents were then in Delhi, and I was then a bachelor, so I wasn't married. My parents were in Delhi. They were very very worried because on two occasions, I did not return to office during my trip to Jessore, and
Yes.
during my trip to Pabna. I didn't return to office to report. So and the office car also did not come back to office. So the management was very scared, and next day there was no report of mine carrying my byline. So my parents got very worried, sent frantic calls to the office in Calcutta, saying that trying to know my whereabouts. But they said that we don't know anything about your son, because last time the car went to his residence, and where he went we don't know. And in those days, the telecom services were pretty bad. There was no mobile phone, so the phone services were so bad that I could not tell them that I was going deep inside from the border. The teleservices were so bad. So naturally, my parents were very anxious, very, very anxious. So were also my colleagues in office. Not all, some. who were very close to me, very close to me. They were very anxious that where is Manash, because in late March, two freelancers of another Calcutta English Delhi who had ventured into East Pakistan from Agartala, they got caught and they were killed very brutally by the Pakistan military.
Yes.
So though there was this anxiety was still greater because they didn't know what had happened to me. But when I came back to office after one day, they were very happy, very happy. They were very happy that well nothing. And when I broke two absolutely battlefront stories from ground zero, they were extremely happy that I had done a good job.
No doubt about that, sir. It is appalling to read that story, and specifically where I think so that happened near the rear itself, that you were assumed to be somebody from the West Pakistani Janta, and somebody who was there to disturb the entire movement. What was your feeling then, sir?
I used to do a lot of exercise, very weightlifting and all. I was very muscular in those days. I was tall. I didn't look a typical Bengali. And in fact, on my way to Pabna, the district magistrate said that, there are certain things about you which make me very worried. I said, what are those? He said that you don't look a Bengali first, and you don't speak the Bengali dialect very fluently, because being a Delhi wala, my Bengali was bit was not that fluent, and I used to drop in lots of Hindi words in my Bangla. So, mm, what was it you asked me?
I asked you, sir, that when you had a near life, near death experience, when people were assuming to you to be somebody from the Pakistani side, what
Punjabi,
was your
Punjabi.
feeling? Punjabi, who is there to disturb the entire Mukti Judo.
I
So,
know.
what was
I know.
your, yeah,
What
yeah.
happened was, while I was fleeing from Pabna and I crossed that mighty Padda, and next morning, early morning, I was with an escort. I and my two of my office colleagues, including photographer and a senior colleague of mine, Mr. Chandrasekhar Sarkar, when we were with that escort, we were heading towards the border on foot through the village path. The villagers got so suspicious. We had got up very early in the morning at 4, because if we had to catch the vehicle at a place called Kumar Khali, so we had to undertake at least 1.5 hours walk. So which we did. But so the villagers got suspicious that what these three people so early in the morning doing, walking through the villages and going where, for what? So, and seeing me, they thought that I was a Punjabi. They thought I was a Punjabi, and they said the Punjabi is fleeing. We must kill that rascal. They said that in their Bangla dialect. Halare Khatum, we shall, and they were armed with machetes, swords, knives, and all. They said,
My God.
we don't want Punjabis to, here, and
Flee
won't allow
East Pakistan.
any Punjabi to flee from here alive. So they blocked my way. It was only the presence of a that escort who could read English. He was a graduate, local graduate, who took my ID card, office ID card, and showed it to them. And then there was in that crowd, that threatening crowd, militant crowd, there was another educated boy who read my ID card and said, "No, no, no, he's an Indian Bengali. He's not a Punjabi." And but then that boy came and asked me, "What the hell are you doing here? If you are a Bengali from Calcutta, what the hell?" I said, "We had come here to cover the war for an English Delhi of India. So this is my ID. You have seen it already." If that convinces you about my identity, it's all right. Otherwise, go do whatever you want to. I was also quite, very, very annoyed, and I not for once did I feel afraid that, well, these people are going to slaughter us, because I knew that they were simple people who mistook my looks, and were, doing were acting so funnily.
So, when you go through the entire incidents in the book, a normal person would really freak out and I know that you are on the right side, but then it is a disturbing tale altogether. And you wrote the entire story. I mean, this book captures your journey very well. But at the same time, so, was the entire period of making this book or writing down the entire journey of yours, was it a easy way of recollecting those memories, or it was very disturbing for you?
It was not disturbing. Shweta, I have all along been a reporter, though I have held jobs of editorship in the Statesman.
Gee,
For long, I have done long stints as editor. But I am essentially a reporter, and I take pride in saying that I am a reporter still. And because my reporter's instincts told me that I must write a book, because I had notes which I had taken along with me to my daughter's place in Chennai, where I got caught in this pandemic,
pandemic, yes.
and I thought the best way to utilize my um getting stuck in Chennai was to write this book, which I had prepared myself all these years. I had taken my notes, and I consulted them, and what happened. All these thoughts, once I started, all these thoughts came absolutely roaring back to my mind, that what all happened, and all the incidents. I mean, it's still very, very crystal clear. It's so deeply etched in my memory that I can distinctly recall what all happened, what all people said to me. But I had the notes to fall back upon, and I think I have done a good job. It's more a reporter's
Wonderful.
diary. My book is more a reporter's diary than a research paper, or whatever you find these days. People writing on Bangladesh. They said
Very
that they have.
true. Yes, sir. I mean, I initially, when I was reading your book, I did saw, there were so many names coming up. There were so many places which were mentioned. Excuse me. And I thought that, how come you remember all these things? And then when I'm talking to you, and when you are mentioning details about the entire journey, I can totally sense what you're talking about. It is an amazing detail about how you went through the entire journey of yours. So So I was just adding up that, your journey with so many names, details about what happened, how did you cross the river, what was the experience in going those trucks was like, is so detailed that it feels like you are yourself on that war front and experiencing everything. At the same time, when you say that, sir, you are a reporter, and because you have, you are in places that I would say all these years, this has been with statements or otherwise, but still you mention a word which is yellow journalism. Yellow journalism, you mentioned that word in your diary, which talks about a lot of things. I would like to know from you, what would you say about the current media and yellow journalism?
Repeat that once again.
So I would like to know from you, there is a word which you add, yellow journalism,
Yes.
and in connection with today's reporting and today's journalism, what would you say, sir?
Shweta, I have mentioned in my book one incident. There was this UNI correspondent called S. who was reporting from Agartala, who had interviewed stragglers and refugees coming from Dhaka, and he was first to report that the Pakistan military had killed 1,000 over 1,000 recruits who were in their sleep in Chittagong cantonment, and almost a similar number were killed in Kumila cantonment by the Pak military. And that report created a furor in India because it was very because that changed the the course of events in Bangladesh, because military Pakistan military killing their Bengali military brothers was absolutely not only reprehensible, but then it aroused a kind of spirit of revenge among Bengalis to take, well, we shall also avenge this killing. And that's how the Bengali military and the paramilitary forces started taking on the Pakistan military and started fighting against them doggedly. And this report, killing of the Bengali military officers, was carried also in the British press, and the British press, the leading lights of the British press, they came down heavily and said that this is not possible. Brother military officers cannot kill brother military officers of the same army, and this is nothing but yellow journalism. This Indian half-baked, the phrase used was half-baked Indian journalists are indulging in yellow journalism, and without going anywhere, sitting in the comfortable confines of their room, they are manufacturing and cock and bull stories, and they are dishing out. Probably they are serving the agenda of the Indian government, the Indian military, to justify action and intervene in Bangladesh, to facilitate Indian intervention in Bangladesh. And that's how where. But there were reports I have mentioned. For instance, a local daily had carried a report which was absolutely, which had no basis at all, totally
Yes.
baseless. That a girl called Roshnara had tied, what you call grenades around her waist and had slipped
Eh,
underneath a Pakistani tank and detonated the
yes.
uh, detonated herself. Which was, we tried to find out the veracity of that story, found no truth in it, and later on we found that, well, someone got so carried away. One Bengali journalist, it appeared in a Bengali daily, he got so carried away by this, Mujib's call for independence and subsequent events, that he manufactured this story. He manufactured that how daring even the Bengali women are in East Pakistan. Just to highlight that. So I have made a mention of that also, so that
Yes.
I want to be very very objective in my presentation of events. I where we went wrong, I have also mentioned, and where we scored, I have mentioned that also. It was, and that Handa's report on cantonment killing was later corroborated by no less a person than Anthony Mascarenhas of Sunday Times, who on June 13th, 1971, carried a huge story, genocide, with headlines, and that created international stir. That vindicated the story that Handa had scored, and that, for the time being, silenced the critics that Indian journalists were practicing yellow journalism and reporting cock and bull stories. So that's that.
Very true. Very true. So, when times like this, it calls for a desperate measure, I would say. But reporting what is exactly true, what is happening, is what journalism is all about. So, my Bangla is not that great. But then, Mukti Judo, I think so. That's what the word would should be pronounced as. When it completes, the Bangladeshi Liberation War completes 50 years today. And when you look back, what does Mukti Judo would mean for you?
It means that it was a just war, Shweta. It was a just war because mm, any country's sovereignty, territorial integrity, they are absolutely sacrosanct. They cannot be wished away, or they cannot be allowed to be undermined by any kind of events, any kind of war or civil strife. But here was a just war because Bengalis who had voted overwhelmingly for Mujib, for Awami League, they were that party. Their leader was not allowed to be the next prime minister of Pakistan, and because the Pakistanis, West Pakistanis, did not like Bengalis and did not like Mujib. They thought that Mujib was a secessionist, and he should not be allowed to be the prime minister of Pakistan. And and It was a just war which had to be fought and won. And I was moved by this consideration. Even now, I think that democracy had to be upheld there, for which I took this journey, undertook this journey.
Very true. And after reading your book, it feels like a journey of every person who is reading that book. And also at the same time, your book makes us feel that, okay, this day this has happened. The next day there is, the story is advancing in a way where we want to know what happens next. I would just like to talk to you about this particular picture, sir, where, just one second. Yeah, well, this one particularly, you're talking about talking to a person who has lost, a family
Oh,
or
this
some
this
family.
this is at the border, right at the border.
Yes,
He is the head of a Hindu refugee family, head of the refugee Hindu family
yes,
whose members had been tortured, and some of them had been killed also. It was a large family, so he had just crossed over to India, and I happened to meet him at a place called Tehotto in Nadia district, and there he told me, narrated his narrative really moved me so much that I just couldn't hold back my tears, and he started crying. I also, seeing him, I also started crying, and in this picture I'm trying to console him that don't cry, things will be all right, things will be all right. There is another picture, Shweta, in which you will find two little girls
yes, sir.
having their meal. Their mothers, one mother is lighting a chula.
This one,
Yes, yes,
this
yes,
one,
lighting a chula. Yes,
yes,
yes.
yes, sir.
It's a very, if you read the caption, it was a very moving sight. I found these two girls crying. The mother had just come across the border for the last 3 days. They did not have anything to eat, and their mother had been able to get some rice from the refugee camp, and they had cooked rice, just rice, nothing else. But that did not their meat quench their hunger. So seeing that, I had an office driver, a fellow called Mahbub. He's seeing that, he's साहब हम जाते हैं कुछ चावल खरीद के लाते हैं. He went to the market, neighboring market, brought 2 kgs of rice, and what you see is that, and he handed over that rice to those two mothers, and you see the one of the mothers lighting a chula to cook the rice. And those two girls were
That's
so sweet, so sweet. Still, they are deeply etched in my memory. Deeply etched. I can visualize their face, their facial look.
definitely, sir. When you look at the story's brighter side, that they getting the food, but at the same time you feel like, this should not be the fate of any child, any men, women, anybody. I would say that this should not be the fate, this should not be the trouble they should be going with. So, apart from everything else, I certainly want to add that when you read the book, there is a line which says that a war has been forced upon us. This is specifically page number 202. All India Radio, the transcript, it was said as a war has been forced on us. So, do you anytime feel that this war could have been, avoided? if Mujib would have been given what he deserved?
Certainly, it was avoidable. In fact, Mrs. Gandhi, till the last moment, I salute that lady. I salute that lady. She's a great leader. Even till the last moment, when she went to Nixon to to persuade Nixon, that persuade Yahya to have a negotiated settlement with Mujib, let him release Mujib and bring him to the negotiating table, and also let a settlement be worked out about transfer of power to the elected government. Um, that if had that been done, it this war could have been, it was an avoidable war, and India just could not avoid it, because it was forced upon us. 10 million, it is officially, it is 10 million, but I think it is almost 20 million, because lots of refugees were living outside the refugee camps also, uh, in private homes. In They had taken houses on rent and whatnot. And it was actually, the figure was 20 million. It was not 10 million. It was 20 million. And it was, and the what was worse was that the refugees were coming out of the refugee camps, because living inside the refugee was absolute hell. There was a large scale breakout of cholera, then conjunctivitis, and all kinds of viral fevers were on. And the refugees were absolutely, they didn't want to stay there in that hellish condition. And they were coming out looking for jobs here and there, odd jobs, and they were undercutting the market rates of local laborers. So that was creating tension in the in many areas, in many states. For instance, Tripura had twice the number of refugees of its population. Can you beat it? Tripura, a small state like Tripura, has twice the number of refugees of its population, and many of them were coming out and vying for jobs that the locals used to perform, and they were undercutting the rates, which caused a lot of disharmony, social disharmony. And in fact, I have mentioned in my book that all kinds of intelligence reports were coming to Mrs. Gandhi and to the bordering states of chief ministers, that um, if this refugees are allowed to come out and create tension, any kind of riot might take place. The Pakistanis would certainly take advantage of that, and will there might be a communal conflagration, so communal riot. So it was, and the Indian government did not want, and moreover, because of economic collapse of East Pakistan, the entire economy of East Pakistan had collapsed because of the what was happening for the last 9 months, and there was the scepter of famine was hanging over East Pakistan,
Yes.
and there was this fear that more refugees, more people would come across to India. And Mrs. Gandhi was scared that if more refugees came, then the Indian economy would collapse. India just could not bear the burden of such a large population to be fed, clothed, and sheltered. So, so, uh, this was the only way out. And when Mrs. Gandhi met Nixon, she told him that if you don't ensure the early return of refugees to to their own homeland with dignity, I shall be forced to do things which may not be which may not make you happy. So these were the things which mattered then.
Very true. So,
It was an
a
avoidable war.
strong
It was an
leadership.
avoidable war. It was an avoidable war which the world leaders chose to ignore. They did not pay heed to Mrs. Gandhi's pleadings for a negotiated settlement. Even at the 12th hour, Mrs. Gandhi and the then Foreign Minister Swaran Singh had made repeated requests that let there be a negotiated settlement, let Mujib be released, first release Mujib, and let Yahya sit down with him and work out a settlement, a political settlement, because only a political settlement could resolve the issue. But the Pakistanis were not relenting. Hmm.
True,
Yes,
very true. What could have been avoided, the mass killing, everything could have been different, but then here we are celebrating the 50th year of Bangladeshi Liberation War. And so, my last question to you, I've been saying that, but this would be my last question to you for sure. I'm not going to take much of your time. But, sir, when I see today, we transfer pictures, we save pictures very easily. We communicate information very easily with just a call or a WhatsApp or a text message. But how did you manage all those things during 1971?
that is $1 million question. Shweta, that's why those were the days. You could send not where you could send a news just by making a click, huh?
Yes,
Or tapping. We had the phone lines were so bad. It were the days of telex and teleprinter, and that too, these facilities were not available everywhere. Phone lines were absolutely it was in a terrible condition. One could not get lines, Calcutta lines. They were overloaded for hours together. So I had to come back to office after the whole day, after collecting all my material, all my reports. I had to come back to office and sit down with my typewriter at the end of the day, which used to be around 10:30, 11 at night every day. And I used to hand in my report around about 1 in the morning. 1 in the morning.
oh my God.
My paper, I
That,
must say this to the credit of my paper and my editor, that for filing my reports, the deadline had been fixed at 1 in the morning, at 1 a.m. So, whereas all other stories had to be in by well before 12. But my deadline was 1. So I used to come back to office by 10:30 and sit down with my typewriter and type out my report and hand it over. No, there was another factor. Other factor was that the Statesman had such a tremendous reputation for its credibility that the editor made it a point that wherever I went, my photographer should accompany me, because my report should not only look authentic, they should read authentic. And my office photographer always went with me and took pictures of the place, of the battlefronts from where I reported, and that's how it was. That's how it was. Mm, that's how it was.
very true, sir. That's because that was my question when I was going to the PG service. I was wondering how come there is nothing which will give us so quick information, and you come to the office and there is everything the next day. So I wanted to do I wanted to ask this while reading the book. This was question that was popping in my head quite a lot of times. I would certainly end this discussion by saying that, sir, this book is massive. I mean, it is not just a book about what has happened. It is a journey what you have lived through, and through your book, we the readers are going to live this forever. At the same time, your book does justice. It is not a very, I would say, a very cozy tale of what was happening, but it is entirety me it is all about the reality of what happened during the Bangladeshi Liberation War. And we are honored to host you on this remarkable day, sir, where the Liberation War finishes, touches 50 years landmark.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.